kitchens. This kitchen went through a whole bunch of different things. This was sort of the final kitchen, besides the floor. Like Andy was saying, they tried this thing where with the real world, Henry wanted to build sets at sort of a rate, so they were forced perspective. So from one angle, they made sense, but all the floors and all the ceilings sort of at this or this. With stop motion, that's really hard to make it work because if the characters take 2 steps back or 2 steps forward, they end up really messing up with the perspective because they aren't moving in real space, and so everyone just sort of sides across like this on one plane. But the idea for the design of a lot of these rooms, we were looking at these houses, pictures of houses that were really old, that had moved into by new people. So like pictures of like Cuba, where they had these huge palatial buildings that were built in the turn of the century, but then now they have like a TV stand and a lawn chair. And that kind of idea that, like if they had moved from somewhere in Michigan from some regular house into this big huge spot, maybe all the furniture just sort of got crowded in the top, 6 feet of the room, and then everything else was really tall apart from that. The other world, that's where it got tricky because you had to sort of line these two things up so they'd be recognizable, but still make the other world a lot more interesting. So a lot of that is just sort of props and busying up the space, but keeping the geometry the same. These were prop sheets. This is how good the shop is. They can make sense of this stuff. If you ever see a prop sheet for a regular movie, they do perspective turnarounds and everything. They do surface callouts and all this stuff. But because the movie took place in sort of a real world, especially with the real world stuff, you could just sort of say, how those stores used to be green. And they were like, oh yeah, sure. And they would just sort of paint it. It was that close where you could just give them something like this and you get the chair back. You wouldn't have to like go in there and say, you gotta change this or that and the other thing. So you could, this is as much drawing as the props got before they went to shop, and they knew exactly what we were talking about. It's more about the ideas that you put in. Like the table would have like a Mylar top because it was like in the 70s or something, and then that would be copper, so you'd find something that looks like copper. Prop sheets, there's one like this, at least one like this for every room, because we got kind of lucky prop-wise because you didn't have to draw all this stuff because it could all be in boxes. The house was supposed to be pretty much empty at the beginning, but the other world made up for it because it was supposed to be just cluttered with everything. That's a dog big parents, or the real parents bedroom, which is all well. I don't think the room got built like this, but it sort of looks the same. That's sort of how it looked from the reverse. The basement took ages. When we first started Tadahiro doing these drawings, when I read the book, I was picturing these ladies living in this like nicely redone apartment with like wallpaper and just like a little British house or something, other house. And that's what Tadahiro had drawn too, and it looked beautiful. They were like, oh great, basement finished. And he's like, no, try something else. I didn't really know what he wanted, and so he kept doing his paintings like this. And he's like, it's a really just like, remember a basement, like a regular basement? We're like, yeah. He's like, just put 2 ladies in there. That's terrible. Okay, they're done there? He's like, yeah, they just find stuff and move it around. It's like, all right. So they're on a tilt here because he had the idea that they live right at the drain of the basement. It's just the basement really did a lot, like, it was a lot worse than we thought it was going to look. Not that it's badly built, but they just live in these bad conditions. I had the idea that they had all these dried flowers from suitors while in bed. You're never going to see the ceiling really, and plus the candy got stuck up there, so it really must have flowers. That's what the basement turned into. That's a really bad picture. But this was the style that a lot of this stuff took later on too. It's just sort of after paintings like doing this, Henry would come and say, well, yeah, but the kitchen should go over to the left. And that meant like a whole other day of painting. And so he was like, this is ridiculous. There's so many revisions to these things that we just started doing drawings of like line drawings or tonals because you get the idea in any way. And the great thing about stop motion is that all this stuff gets built. So you don't need to convince them with light or space. You know that it's going to be sitting there because they're building it. So a lot of these sets turned out drawing like getting developed this way. And if he says you want to redo something over here, you just erase the line layer and redraw the line. It makes it a much easier process. It took about a year to get there. But that's sort of the final. This took a long time to get to this point. Dan had his statues, and we were kind of echoing all the stuff from the theater that was going to turn into it. All this stuff sort of wanted to line up. So if the dogs were sitting in the wings, they were on shelves on the sides. And if we had statues on the sides, this was going to be like sort of the stage lights. This is sort of echoed that stuff later. A lot of the sets were, a lot of care was taken to that stuff, and he had this idea of lining up shots that if you flip between them, even if the film didn't, if you ever took them apart and did that, they would line up like almost to perspective lines, like really, really close. And it was good because even if they didn't line up, it gave us a framework to work around to decorate these sets with. The other good thing about doing sets is that you don't have to be on model with the characters that can look like Muppets. I mean, often did because I don't draw characters very well. This kind of stuff was done a lot too, where you had to take the same stage, the basement, and then the good real world, and then, or the good other world, and the bad other world. And just making sure all these kind of things lined up. I like this guy. He ended up in the movie. These are just color keys for like how the light that they